to be rational, the person to be rational, the person of thinking should be realized by virtues. The person should possess the virtues. This makes thinking rational. This is a totally different perspective on rationality. Okay. So I'm now coming back and try to explain both sides. Do you follow the main idea? The main idea is negative sign in the sense that rationality, there's no rationality as a unifying concept. This is revolutionary enough. And the positive side says that you come back to virtues to figure out the nature of rationality. Okay. Morton himself in the first and second, the book has 6 chapters, and Morton in introduction, first and second chapter confines himself to argue for the negative side, that there is nothing like rationality. And for this, he wants to even reject the narrowest conception of instrumental rationality in ordinary context. That in ordinary context you have a kind of instrumental rationality conception, and that is articulated in terms of maximizing utility. Okay, I think it fails. Okay, the idea, as you may guess, comes back to Simon, that he was talking about bounded thinking, and that we are limited in different ways. And one particular virtue that the rational person has is to know his or her own limitation. If you are limited in a significant way, and you're ignorant of this fact, or you know that but you disregard this fact, even if you try to maximize utility, self-interest, whatever, you would not be rational at the end of the day. Why? Because you're not able to do that. You're limited in a significant way. So we are limited agents in many different ways, cognitively, biologically, culturally, so on and so forth. If we disregard these limitations and try to be rational, I don't mean action and belief, whatever, and follow maximizing model, we most likely fail. In many cases. In those cases, that the limitations play a significant role. So, so the idea is to come back to Simon that I talked about last session. Well, Morton is not alone in this kind of nihilism about rationality. In fact, the idea has another source that's coming from Stephen Stich. He's a naturalist. It's interesting that how these all different views play with each other. Yeah.
I'm Vladimir Chiric from University of Belgrade in Serbia. Well, on the other previous yes.
This one?
Yeah.
Okay. Good.
Yes, on the previous slide. Well, I found something sort of interesting. I mean, that is there were no, that was not the one. But I saw some
positive side, negative side. I had 4 slides. So
very previous one slide. I mean that we.
This is the first, second.
No, I found something. No, limitations. That was about limit. I mean,
okay.
The first sentence was yeah, and the second yes, and the second which is limitation, which blah capacity that we encourage one another. Well, is it to say that I mean this has some personalistic side of it? I mean, interpersonal. I mean,
which part you are talking about? I'm not sure I got it.
There are virtues of limitation management, virtual, learnable, valuable capacity that we can profitably encourage one another to exhibit.
Yeah.
I mean, does it bear any interpersonal, I mean, or is it applies only to non-agents, I mean, or non...
Okay, good, very good question. Yeah, I see. Well, yeah, Morton relies on a kind of interpersonal conception of virtue. That's right. Virtues are somehow internally linked to what's going on in the world and what's going on among your environment and your neighbors, and so to speak. So virtue is a learnable, valuable capacity. So learnability is important because rationality should have some learnable side. You should be able to gain it. Okay, and it should be a capacity, because in many cases you have the capacity, you possess the virtue, but you do not show it, you do not act it, you do not act upon, you do not act in the sense that you do not realize. And it should be something that is objective in the sense that it has that interpersonal side. This is because virtues, understood as an ancient Aristotelian term, are things that have a normative side. When I say that patience is a virtue, somehow I think this means that I can, in some situations, tell you that, or you tell me, that you should be patient. It's a normative force. In some, when I say patience is virtue, it means there are some contexts in which I can say, and I can judge, I can give you normative judgment. One should be patient in that context. So virtues have a normative flavor, have normative aspect. If they have normative aspect, they should, in themselves, be linked in some sense to other people, to account for that normative side. Yeah, but that's a very good and interesting point. So virtues are multidimensional. Virtues, on the one hand, are learnable. On the other hand, they are potentials. On the other hand, they are somehow normative. And these strange entities, i.e. virtues, Morton suggests, should be the foundation of theory of rationality. Should be the main ingredients of understanding rationality. Do we have all one kind of virtues? Definitely not. Moral virtues might be distinct from epistemic virtues. But does this mean that there is no common virtue between them? No. Okay, so we are just at this stage that we are going to substitute the notion of rule following, maximizing, with the notion of possession of virtues to understand rationality. Good. Question? Yeah, go ahead.
So virtues suggest a combination of the subjective and the objective. They're a subjective conditioning of the individual along the lines of certain things that are objectively viewed as good. And I'm wondering, how far do we take the objectification side of that sort of dualism within virtue, and how we might contextualize virtue within historical religious circumstance, and perhaps question the level of objectification that we can give to certain virtues across different circumstances.
Okay. Okay, let me try be just to what you said. I'm not sure I understood it, but this is what I got. Correct me, please. Sorry. Okay. When I say, okay, if patience is virtue, if something is virtue, it means that given such and such conditions, a person should do what this virtue suggests. So the psychological side, the subjective side is given that such and such condition regarding the person. There is another objective side to virtue which says perform such and such act to reach such and such goal. Virtues somehow are tied up with ends. Ends are objective. You perform an act, you possess a virtue, you realize it because it leads to something that is the goal, that is the aim. And this one is objective in some sense. Or no, I was and then how to reconcile the...
But we've objectified patience as this objective concept.
Okay.
We've sublimated certain actions and states of being, I'm sorry for being imprecise,
No.
under the bannerhead of something that we're objectively naming as patience.
Okay.
Where in different historical and
I see.
cultural circumstances, those subjective factors might not lead to patience, or we might not ascribe patience to them.
Actually, you're
yeah, good.
suggesting that actually virtues are very subjective. They can be reflected.
Well, I mean, the notion of introducing virtue is to introduce a degree of subjectivity to the conversation. But in the way that they've been presented here, they belie an attempt to just reconstrue the kind of objectivity that we've been uncomfortable with the notion of self-interest. Do you see what I'm saying?
I guess Karen wants to add something.
I like what Ezra is searching for, that we feel uncomfortable with the interjection of the notion of virtue in this modern discussion. We have to fall back on an older concept, but of course it's been made into an epistemic virtue or intellectual virtue. But the idea is that it's a capacity that allows us to perform rationally or operate our reason. Remember the hadith that Professor Awani mentioned, and I also mentioned about the troops of aql, junude aql jahal. It's a famous hadith. And there are all these so-called virtues. It says the mark of the intelligent person would be that he possesses these virtues. Some of them are the classical moral virtues, but some of them are rather interesting. If we look carefully at the list, there's some of them approach these ideas of, open-mindedness and willing to consider it. They're flexible. So it seems that dissatisfaction with the inadequacy of contemporary thought about rationality, there's no coherent conception. In my own search for understanding rationality in modern discussion, I came to the same conclusion that they don't agree on anything, and no one has clearly thought about this. If you go back to the medieval and classical period, all of a sudden you're in a certain realm of certainties. But here it's very fluid and uncertain. So maybe this idea of virtue has some utility, and we shouldn't have abandoned it in the Enlightenment. But is it subjective? Is virtue just a subjectivism? Or if virtue is linked with knowledge and with being, and intelligence and reason has some ontological status, as we're told that Islamic rationality teaches, then virtue is not a concept that could be subjective. It could be a door to a form of objectivity. After all humans have a certain common level of standard of truth. Otherwise, there is no one, there's just different truths and different rationalities. Greeks will think like Greeks, and Turks will think like Turks. I mean, there's no one way of thinking like a human, is it? Or do just within the Anglo world of late modernity, they talk like this, but the continentals in French or German don't talk like this. This is another aspect of modernity. Anglo thought it has some peculiarities about it. Sorry.
And they like that. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm saying, in response to Dr. Crow, I'm uncomfortable with the idea of virtue representing a new kind of objectivity that we should strive for in order to remain collectively ensconced within the husk of truth, and instead perhaps suggest a way of communication between subjectivities, and that means thinking more about language and certain discursive practices instead of wishing that we all fall under the same banner of virtuous truth in order to find commonality and to live with one another peacefully.
Okay.
Admirable modern sentiment. But what would you think Morton would say? After all, the word virtue is a little of a, seems to impose some problems. A word laden with religious and moral connotations to be taken simply as a philosophical concept. Don't you think there's some issues here?
Okay.
Many things to say, and I will not be able to say, but I try. Ezra is bothered, and everyone like us would be bothered by something, and that is the threat of subjectivity, the threat of losing objectivity, put in the Husserlian terminology, losing objectivity of science in particular. People are bothered by that because, recall Husserl in the introduction of the logical investigation. Husserl says that after a while I realized that, it just came to my mind after Ezra's point, I realized that mathematics is possible without quiddity, and it seems that there is a more general conception of mathematics and objectivity. Okay, keep that. Come back to a discussion. It seems that we want science to be objective first. Second, we want science to be rational. So we want kind of objective rationality. Third, virtues are subjective. If rationality should be understood in terms of virtues, we lose that objective rationality we pursue. So this is kind of worry, I acknowledge. But I'm not sure about the robustness of this worry, because look, first of all, you need the semantic side of truth all along. The claim is not that you can make sense of rationality just in virtue of virtues. You need truth. Truth is the thing that links you to the reality, links you to the ontology, links you to the semantics. So truth is not missing. The problem is whether you need virtues at a fundamental level to explain rationality or not. Morton thinks you need. Okay, second point, as Karen pointed out, are we talking about virtues in the moral, religious sense or not? It seems that, for two reasons, there is no clear answer to this, but it seems that in many cases we do not. We talk about virtues, first of all, distinguish between religious virtues, moral virtues, and epistemic virtues. Religious virtues I'm just trying to defend, to make the whole idea sensible. Okay, what is a virtue? Virtue is a learnable, valuable capacity that we can profitably encourage one another to exhibit. The source of value can come from different places. It can come from morality. It can come from morality. It can come from religion. It can come from knowledge. Knowledge can make some states virtuous. Morality can make some state virtuous. Religion can make some state virtuous. They may overlap, yes. They may fall apart in some cases, yes, they may. Do we have a clear taxonomy of virtues? Perhaps not. What we are dealing with, what Adam Morton is trying to argue for, is that the framework for understanding rationality is mistaken. Mistaken. The framework for understanding rationality is mistaken because it does not allow virtues in. In maximizing utility, maximizing self-interest, you are not talking about virtues at all. The virtues are not perhaps moral virtues. Let me give you something that might help if I have it here. I don't have the book yet, but do I have a list of some virtues? Not here. Maybe in another. Let me show you. Let me talk about virtues a bit because it's important, and then come back to the negative, positive side.
Basically, he's trying to correct instrumental rationality. Is that what you're hinting at? You go beyond it or you prove it, feels it's not adequate. Just ignore.
I think this is a corollary of his view. Yeah. It may be interpreted as just correcting instrumental rationality, but it may open the door for other virtues, other values to constitute new conceptions of rationality. It's kind of two-sided, at least I think. Yeah, but I agree that this at least criticizes the instrumental rationality conceptions.
You know, when you come to intelligence, not rationality, it's very popular now in the last 20, 30 years. They talk about social intelligence, moral intelligence, emotional intelligence. Recently now the term spiritual intelligence has appeared. And some cognitive psychologists have revived the word wisdom. So these are also similar, going back to older ideas because of the inadequacy of the modern frame of reference. It's an interesting phenomenon.
Good. And in fact, Morton talks about intelligence too. Because it's a byproduct of view that if you want to understand the conception of rationality, you should say something about intelligence. Good point. And in fact, he says things like that at the end. That we need a new conception of intelligence.
That's what I had asked earlier when I asked about what do they say about the self and what do they say about reason itself.
Good.
They're talking about rationality, but have they dealt with the real, baffling problem of what is reason and intelligence? And most of the Islamic exponents who have spoken here have stressed this is a mystery that we cannot fathom completely, and that Muslim thinkers always were aware this is a very fundamental point for humans to fasten on, but no one pretends that they have solved all these issues.
Yeah, actually I had different reasons for presenting Morton today. The day Morton sent his book to me, and I asked him, he published a paper in Analysis some months ago, Accomplishing Accomplishment. It's a different story. It's not about virtues and other things. I'll talk about it. And I read that one and I said, Adam, can you send the book to me? And he sent the book to me, and it's not in press yet, just read it. And we talk about it, and he said, why don't you call it virtue rationality? And he said, it's a good name, but... And then the problem came out, and Morton said, no, virtue rationality, I'm not ready going that far. So let's put another name, it's bounded. But there is something to it, I thought it's pretty novel and can be useful. And Morton has not done that. For one thing, I'm not sure if Adam is ready. I think he's comfortable with that, but Adam is atheist. So for him, it's moving toward religious virtues is not really something substantial, something really, that he wants to do. But I think there is a lot to it if you be careful about what you're talking about. So, virtues. Here are some virtues that Adam mentions, I don't know, somewhere in his book, I have chapter 4. Zine virtues. Virtues are approaching the problem with conscious, controlled type 2 processes, forget about type 2, type 1, with unconscious and automatic type 1 processes. Just put that unfamiliar jargon and focus on the structure of virtues, approaching a problem with conscious, controlled, delicate manner. This kind of virtue is not, I think, rooted in explicit religious claim. It might be some religious ground for that, but it's not rooted in explicit moral religious thing. You may indirectly link them together. But obviously this is an epistemic virtue. That when you are encountered with a problem, you approach it in a kind of delicate way. Think about threshold virtues. Virtues of knowing when one has collected enough evidence. This is again an epistemic virtue. Well, it's the main complaint, which is right, I think, or one of the main complaints, is that virtues are vague. I'm comfortable with this, rather than saying virtues are subjective. What I see and acknowledge is that virtues are vague. Vague. V-A-G-U-E. Vagueness. Vague. Yeah, vagueness. So imprecise. Yeah, sorry, mispronunciation. Virtues are vague. They are not precise. But virtues are subjective. I'm not sure. It depends. So these virtues are epistemic virtues. They might not be subjective. For example, look at this virtue of evidence handling virtues, virtues of managing competing reasons for and against believing. How you manage your evidence may be something objective, but the virtue that one should possess to exhibit that virtuous behavior is still vague. Okay, we don't know what does it take to possess such and such virtue. So epistemically speaking, they are vague. In terms of characterization, they are vague. They may be subjective, may not. But the point is that they are epistemic intellectual virtues. Okay. So I'm not sure how satisfied Ezra is with this clarification about virtue. But the worries definitely are with you to the end. And so perhaps you should read the book and see how Adam tries to get rid of them. Okay, let's come back to... Oh no. Where was I? Okay. So I was talking about the new conception of rationality. Okay. I said that this new approach is rooted in both Simon's work about bounded thinking, bounded rationality, and the Stephen Stitch book named Fragmentation of Reason. Stitch shares the kind of nihilist view about rationality, but for different naturalist views. Okay, what Morton suggests instead of the standard conception is paralleling concepts, knowledge, and accomplishment. Okay. So think of knowledge first. For knowledge, you need to